Hello, and welcome back to the Film Library, a Kanopy podcast. I'm Kristy Puchko, entertainment editor at Mashable.com.
And I'm Jeff Rauseo, film lover, social media influencer, and a proud binge watcher of all things bold and brilliant.
This week, we're celebrating Pride Month with a deep dive into Kanopy's curated Pride collection, an essential lineup of LGBTQ plus cinema that spans decades, genres, and voices.
From indie darlings and groundbreaking documentaries to international gems and queer classics, these are the films that reflect, challenge, and expand our understanding of identity and representation.
We'll talk about some of our personal favorites, explore what makes these films vital year-round, not just in June, and highlight hidden gems you won't want to miss.
So grab your favorite beverage and settle in for a cinematic celebration of pride, power, and storytelling.
Sounds great, Jeff. Do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, I'm going to kick it off with a recent favorite of mine. This movie, Shiva Baby, I absolutely loved, and it put me down a rabbit hole of Rachel Sennett. Now I've seen every movie that she's ever been in. But I'll tell you a little bit about it. So the thing with Shiva Baby is it's definitely a comedy, but as I was watching it, I was like, this is almost borderline like a claustrophobic horror movie. For somebody with social anxiety, I would put it in the horror category. It's like the most anxious movie I've ever seen. But the story is basically about, it's Danielle. She's played by Rachel Sennett. She's multiple things. She's sugar baby. She's a student. She's trying to figure out her life. She's right in that, like, I'm about to graduate college. What am I going to do? And that's the question everybody is asking her at this Shiva, which, if you don't know, that's like a Jewish mourning gathering, sort of like a wake type of deal. So she ends up going to this thing, and she is just trapped in this house with what ends up being her sugar daddy. Shows up, his wife and baby, her ex-girlfriend who's also there, and then all of these people who are just trying to ask her what she's going to do with her life when she's 22 and is like, the answer is I don't know.
And also who are deeply not aware, one, of her being a sugar baby, and two, probably not of her being bisexual.
Right. So she's got all this stuff going on. Nobody knows. She's the only one dealing with this sugar daddy disaster that's happened by him showing up with his wife and baby. And honestly, the movie, it's only 77 minutes long. It was actually Emma Seligman, who's the director. It was her first film right out of film school. She made a short originally, turned this into a feature. But it's like that 77 minutes can feel so long, like in a good way, not in a bad way, but oh my God, the tension and the awkwardness in this movie. And it is like very funny too.
Sure.
Like the situational comedy is hilarious, but it's like this weird, it's sort of genre-less.
Sure.
I mean, but I loved it. And I thought one of the coolest things about it too is like, they don't make it a big deal that she's just bisexual. And it was just like, it's not a big deal. It's like, this is just her identity. And so she's going about the day and dealing with an ex-girlfriend and also the sugar daddy, and all of this is just normalized in a way that also makes you very anxious because of what her life is. It's funny, messy, like it's a lot of fun. And if you haven't seen the follow-up, Bottoms, which absolutely incredible as well. So I've got Emma Seligman and Rachel Sennett on my like watch list of like, pay attention over the next 10 years because they're both going to be, I think, huge.
Yeah, I think a big part of what I liked about Shiva Baby watching it was as a bisexual, it's a very chaotic bisexual movie. And I related to that. And it's also just like, it's like she is a bisexual and that is an element of the film. But more broadly, it's about those things about being a grown-up that you are not telling your parents, even if you're still depending on your parents. And this movie, like, I would compare it to like Uncut Gems, where I think it's great, but it also deeply stressed me out. Like, I love this movie. It was in my top 10 the year it came out, 2020. But yeah, it's
so stressful. Yeah, it really is. And if anybody who's recently come out of college and has had to deal with all of it, like, that's the thing that's cool is like, it's not just her finding like her identity, and it's her finding her identity as a whole. Like, literally, what am I going to do and who am I going to be, and like work, job, relationships, all of it. So yeah, it's a really great movie.
I love that. My first pick, I'm gonna take it back to a period piece, but not a period piece you might think of. It's called Wild Nights with Emily, And before Dickinson came to Apple TV, this movie came out. It's from director Madeline Olnick, and it stars Molly Shannon as Emily Dickinson, the poet. And so it takes us back to Emily's time where women were wearing those enormous skirts. And the thing is, like, growing up, the way they talked about Emily Dickinson, like, she was a recluse, she was an amazing poet, and most of the poems only were published after she died because she was so shy. And this movie goes, no, no to all of that. And what's actually really interesting is that this is true. One, she wasn't a recluse, and two, she was a lesbian. It's like it's not remotely subtle. If you actually go back, like her niece wrote about this in 1914. It was like, no, my mother, which was Emily's sister-in-law, and my aunt were in love with each other. It was a love that lasted decades. They lived side by side. They, most of the poems that Emily wrote, I shouldn't say most, I can't tell, I'm not great with numbers. A lot of the poems that she wrote were about Sue, and this movie is very smart because not only does it tackle the topic of like taking history and erasing queerness from history, but it does it in a very smart way where the narrator of the movie is the person responsible for the way we tend to think of Emily Dickinson, which was this woman. Her name was Mabel Todd, and she was like in the social circle of Emily's brother. And once Emily died, she was like, we should publish her poems and I'll edit them and I'll give them titles and I will scratch out anytime she said Sue or things got too gay. And so, yeah, she very much and she did it so she could be famous, so she could be a part of this legend. And so what the movie does that's so fascinating is Mabel is the one doing the narration of scenes, and then what you watch is not at all what Mabel is saying. So she's like, "Oh, Emily Dickinson was a recluse," and then you just see Emily and Susan walk into a room together and fiercely make out until they fall on the ground, and that's how the movie starts. And it's just it's very funny. It's very sweet. Again, if you've seen Dickinson, there's maybe not a lot here that will surprise you. This did come out before Dickinson. So, I didn't know any of this. So it was really interesting to me. And then I went down a rabbit hole when I first saw it. And I was like, oh, wow. Like a lot of these things make a much more sense if you know who Emily actually was. And it also is an interesting way of making you reflect on what we think we know about history. Because a common thing people love to say is like, oh, well, nowadays, as if queerness is a new concept. And like, it's not. And this is a movie that tells that story in a way that is very funny and very self-reflective, that like you have to kind of after I watched this movie, I was like, well, now anytime I read a history book, I'm in my head about like, what are you leaving out? And I think that's a really great critical thinking skill to develop. But also just Molly Shannon is very funny as Emily because she is
so funny. She's
yeah,
the best.
She's just like, this movie's like very she's like, Emily's very witty and is constantly kind of saying things that are above people's heads. So it's a lot of like being the smartest person in the room and the pain of that. But yeah, I deeply, deeply love this movie. I just think it's such a clever way to tackle such a complicated topic.
I think I need to move this to the top of my watch list because it's hit like my wife and I, we love Molly Shannon, Superstars, like one of her favorite movies. Emily Dickinson too, like born and raised in Massachusetts and then going to a liberal arts college myself, like we learned a ton about Emily Dickinson. So as a history major, some of you study this in school, high school, college, like, yeah, they leave out a lot of stuff in the history books. There's a lot of reading in between the lines, doing more research. The book they hand you in high school is at the highest level of history. And you also have to remember, hey, who writes the history? So there's a lot more to learn, and I think that's important, and this movie sounds fantastic, so I'm definitely going to check it out. So I've got another period piece for you here. This one's 18th century France. We're going to do Portrait of a Lady on Fire from 2019. And this is also lesbian romance, the story of Marianne. She's a painter hired to secretly create a portrait of Heloise, who's a woman being forced into marriage. Oh, that's always fun. And the two women, they slowly fall in love, but their romance is kind of just doomed by the world they're in, the time period they're in, and not just because they're queer women, but just because they're women in this time when, freedom was not what it should be. So the director, Celine Sciamma, she's also openly queer, directed and wrote this film, and it really feels like it's a little voyeuristic. Like you feel like you're watching something unfold, which is really cool. I like movies like that. There's a lot of observation, connections to make. There's some mutual understanding you have with the characters. The camera's not just kind of there. You're kind of learning with the camera. You're almost watching it as the camera person, which is I always love that kind of movie that kind of inserts you into it rather than as if you're watching something on a screen. And then I will say, like, the ending of this is tragic. I mean, it's not. You feel kind of good throughout the movie, like, oh, maybe, even though we know the time period and we know what's happening, you're like, maybe, just maybe. And the ending is not quite that. It is kind of devastating. It's just, it's the whole movie's kind of a slow burn. You're kind of waiting for that payoff, and you get a payoff, but it's probably not what you wanted, which I know when we watched this, my wife cried. This is very typical of
Sure.
these endings. That's one of her key, like La La Land killed her. Like, don't give me an
Right.
ending and then take it away.
And like
And
that's the nice thing about this movie is it plays into that trope that we've seen a million times in heteronormative couples about this
Right.
idea of these two people who are in love, but like time and circumstance is not working with them.
Right. And yeah, most of the time it's like, well, movie magic, we'll make it work. And it's like, no, like, this is like probably what would have played out, and this was the reality of the situation, and that's what makes it so tragic in this time period. That's where society was and where people were, and they felt like they couldn't be themselves. So super tragic ending. Hate to be a bummer, but like, the movie is really beautiful. It's really, really well done. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous film. My next pick is also a lesbian romance drama, but one that has a pretty surprising ending. This is Fire from 1996 from writer-director Deepa Mehta. And I saw it in college the first time, and I remember my heart was in my throat because it is a film about two women in India who fall in love. And basically, they are married to brothers. They do not have good marriages. That, like, for various reasons, their husbands are just not involved with them sexually. There's one is like more interested in another woman. Another one, he believes his religious devotion means he shouldn't touch his wife. And for these reasons, these women feel very alone and very frustrated. But one of them is like a new wife. So where the other one is kind of in this idea of like, this is just what life is, the younger one is like, why though? And they start to hang out, they start to bond, and it's this really beautiful story about that relationship. Their names are Radha and Sita, and notably, those are names of Hindu goddesses. And within the film, they bring in Hindu religious elements and talk about different stories within that, including one about fire. And it all is such a gorgeous story. And notably, this was the first Indian film to show a queer relationship. And the reaction was strong.
I'm sure.
There
Yeah.
were riots in various cities in India about this movie. People were vandalizing theaters. The government got involved. The filmmaker had to kind of step up for freedom of expression. And it became a real focal point in the conversation that was arising about queer rights in India. Which is part of why we learned about it in college, because they were like, not only is this film important for the role it plays in the history of cinema, but like it had an impact, like that really brought this conversation out.
What year was this?
1996.
Okay.
And I rewatched it the other day because I hadn't seen it in years, and it's just like, it is an important film, and I think in Pride Month we tend to have a tendency to talk about important films, but it's also just a really lovely family drama because incredibly, which is not something, the part I did not remember was that the writer director actually does help you understand where the men are coming from in this too. And that allows you to see this heteronormative marital structure as a gender norms box that is not necessarily useful even to men. So
Yeah.
and like it, and like I will, without giving too much away, it is a movie about two women that are not supposed to be together according to the society they're in, and it is called Fire, but it doesn't end in tragedy. And I just want to put that out there because I remember watching this in college and being deeply like, and then what I feared would happen did not. And I just want to put that out there because it's really lovely to actually see a film that gets to celebrate queer love without feeling the need to, you know, also have a tragedy attached to it. And like there are lots of reasons historically why that happens in films, including the fact that like, you know, Hays Code era stuff, it was like you couldn't introduce these kind of things without there having to be some sort of repercussion. But even in modern day, it's just become this thing where, I mean, like Brokeback Mountain is amazing, but there's all these movies where we still associate queer love, especially within a period setting, as something that has to end tragically. And Fire is not so much a period setting, but like the way that they approach this, I thought was really interesting. The way it talks about religion and uses religion to make queerness, like to valorize queerness instead of denigrate it. And I thought that was really incredible.
So to pivot from Fire, let's talk about somebody who is currently on fire as a director, and that is Sean Baker. I'm going to talk about his film Tangerine from 2015. So Sean Baker, real quick, just Honora was his film, just won everything. He went director, screenplay, it won Best Picture, won Best Actress. He's like the hottest guy in Hollywood at the moment. I'm sure lots of people fighting for him. But back in 2015, he's still just this very down-to-earth indie filmmaker, but he shot Tangerine in 2015 entirely on an iPhone, which I think is super cool. Use what you have, make a movie, and centered it completely around a trans woman of color, which just, you know, shook up, I think, everybody's idea of what, like, we just talked about, like, important queer cinema. Like, this was just raw and shot on an iPhone. He gave this real lifelike portrayal and had, you know, two trans women in the lead roles playing these characters. So the whole movie set on Christmas Eve in LA. I love the name of this character, Cinderella. There's a trans sex worker. She just got out of jail, finds out her boyfriend's been cheating on her. And so she and her best friend, Alexandria, they hit the streets to basically go track them down. And it's chaotic. It's hilarious. It's electric. You know, it moves very quickly, heartbreaking at times. But the whole, like, the guerrilla techniques that Sean Baker used and the research that he did, like, he spent time in these communities with these women, got to know them. You know, it didn't feel like, which sometimes it can feel this way, like it wasn't just a cis director, like kind of picking a narrative and being like, yeah, this is cool. Like, it really was informed by the community in LA. They shot in real locations, you know, taking that iPhone just right in, very guerrilla filmmaking. And it kind of feels like a documentary in some ways. Like, it really has that feel to it. And for me, when I first saw this, I first saw Tangerine a couple years after it came out, when Sean Baker started to get some more kind of oomph and was
Like
kind
Florida
of,
Project era?
yeah, like I saw Florida Project and I was like, wow, that felt real, and I'm sad. So I was like, let me see what else this guy's done. So I went back to this, and I'll say, like, at that point, just straight white man, like, did I have a real understanding of this community and like what it was all about? No, but this movie really opened my eyes quite a bit and kind of made me understand as best as I can. I can never understand it the way that these women can, but like, just that experience and the breakdown of that really opened my eyes, and I think opened my mind a little bit too, beyond where it may have been at the time. I was young and who knows? I'm Shiva Baby. I'm trying to figure myself out. But this movie really did something for me. My wife and I both loved it, and we were like, wow, like more of this. Like, and then, yeah, Florida Project and what he's gone on to do, but more of this. This was real and raw, but just so grounded, but also chaotic. And you just felt like you were there. You felt like you were watching this as very voyeuristic again, kind of like a portrait.
Right. And I think that's what also made Tangerine stand out so much at the time, because it was very critically heralded. And Mia Taylor, who stars in the film, critics were going crazy for her. There were so many.
Yeah.
I feel like she won a bunch of critics awards.
She won a Spirit Award, and she was the first trans woman that ever won that. So yeah, it was a big deal.
And she's great in this. And part of what I think is so powerful in the way Sean Baker makes movies is that he looks at these marginalized groups, and he's done this since Prince of Broadway. He's done it in Red Rocket, and sex is a very common theme. Sex workers are a very common theme in his work, and the way he approaches it is an almost un-American stance, in that we have such a shame around that when you see a character in a movie and she is a trans sex worker, it is normally a very cliched, very negative portrayal. And Tangerine really turned that on its head, because, like, they are sex workers, and the story is more about when you have a crappy boyfriend.
Right.
And like, who can't relate?
Yeah.
And like, truly, I remember watching this for the first time, and it had so much critical praise around it that I had an idea in my head of what
Mm,
it was going to be. And what I love about Sean Baker movies is now that I've seen more of them, I'm better at guesstimating what I'm going to see. But it's like he refuses to put his things into these boxes. And so, like, every time I see one of his movies, there's stuff in it where I'm like, oh, wow. Like, it just didn't occur to me that a filmmaker could do that. And yeah, when you talk about the guerrilla tactics and the rawness, like, visually, this is a very, the movie feels illegal because it's all
right.
shot in this very kind of, like, you feel really on the run with these women.
Yeah.
Or like, it feels, it's like the kind of thing where you're like, this is so much fun, this should be illegal. Like, that's the kind of feel of the movie.
Yeah.
Is that like, how can someone get away with this when people are making all these like big, very serious movies? And he's like, I'm going to make this really smart comedy about Christmas.
Yeah.
And like,
It's so anti Hollywood, which is so it's like you mentioned, like, it's not
even
very
though it's
American.
shot like 20 minutes,
It's
30
right
minutes
there.
away.
Right. And he does, I mean, he does it, but like it feels very European in a way. Like, it feels outside of the system. It's not, it's different. It's so different. It's so cool. But yeah, you feel like you're chasing them with your iPhone, like, and that you're reviewing the footage now. Like, it really is neat.
Yeah, I like it. It feels like you're one of the girls.
Yeah.
Love that. Yeah, my film also talks a bit about transness, but a broader kind of, it's more of a queer movie that's not interested in labels, which I kind of honestly love. Because it's not ducking them. It's just saying sometimes you don't need them. And that's National Anthem from 2023. It's written and directed by Luke Gilford. And speaking about movies that show you a life or a, community you don't know anything about, this is about the rodeo community, which I was a small town girl and then a New York City girl. I don't know anything about the rodeo. So this was really interesting. It's a film that stars Charlie Plummer as a young man who is working on ranches and kind of making ends meet any way he can to help support his mom and his young brother. And then he comes across this ranch where everybody in the ranch, it's a very chosen family queer community on the ranch. Eva Lindley is in this, Mason Alexander Park is in this, and he is drawn to this and they take him in, and like, he gets to kind of experiment with sexuality and gender expression. And he goes to the queer rodeo where you have drag queens singing the national anthem in a cowboy hat. And I think it's so fascinating because, again, a lot of times in cinema, when we represent queerness in America, it's in big cities. Like, even, Emily Dickinson, very near Boston, like
Yeah.
Tangerine, set in California, set in Los Angeles. So
Yep.
like, this is saying like, queerness exists everywhere. And it's a really beautiful portrait. And like, Luke Gilford grew up queer in a rodeo family. So it comes from a very personal place for him. And it's just a gorgeous movie where you just kind of fall into it and like, miraculous vibes basically. And I remember when I first saw it, I was just really knocked out. And I think if you want something that's kind of dreamy and like isn't racing through its plot, like, National Anthem is a really beautiful movie that is about, finding your path and finding who
Mm.
you are and finding your community.
I love that. No, I didn't. This is recent, 2023. You said. I don't know how I missed this one, but that sounds incredible. So it's this rodeo. So it's like a gay rodeo. That's what
Yeah.
this is. Interesting. Which I
Yeah.
didn't even know existed. See, so that's
I
my
didn't either, which is
yeah.
like the what I know about rodeo can be contained to this movie.
Okay.
And I guess Brokeback Mountain. Those are my reference points.
I know from what you just told me about the movie is how much I know about rodeo. So it sounds like I can learn a lot more about the
Yeah,
rodeo.
it was really, I love a movie that takes you into a community that I don't know anything about, and
Right.
this rodeo was definitely that community.
No, that's what I tell people all the time. Like, if you just the greatest way, especially if you can't, like, I've got kids, I'm like, I'm not traveling a lot. The greatest way to experience other cultures is like to go find those movies made by those people that really have that authentic voice, and then boom, now your mind is open just that 1% more if that's all you needed, or maybe it's wide open now. But that's the beautiful thing about movies, is who knew? I had no idea. Now I know. Now I have a movie to watch about it. So going from sort of the more modern vulnerabilities of the national anthem, now we're going to go back in time to 1970, very historic movie, The Boys in the Band. And so I actually want to talk about The Boys in the Band 1970, the William Friedkin, is what's on Kanopy, but you may have heard it more recently. There's a 2020 version as well. So I'll touch on each a little bit, but sticking with the 1970 version, this was based on a play from 1968, one of the first like mainstream works to depict all these openly gay characters. And then the 1970 film, William Friedkin's making that, from what I understand at the timeline, making it before the Stonewall riots. It comes out after them. So it's in this very like tense time in this community. And it really does capture all those, the painful dynamics of this homophobia, the repression, trying to survive in this world that has not been accepting yet. And it is also this single setting, which is really cool, just in a single apartment in New York. If you like something like a 12 Angry Men, like it has a vibe like that to it, where you're getting these great conversations and you're really feeling the pain and the struggle from these actors.
Mhm.
And it's a really honest portrayal, from what I understand, of that time period and what they were going through. And to kind of counter that, in 2020, when they've remade it, they put it back. It was a play again. They put it back on Broadway. They took that whole Broadway cast, they made it into a movie for Netflix, and Ryan Murphy made it. That one feels more like a historical document versus watching something at the time.
Oh, that's interesting. I've seen the remake, but I haven't seen the original version.
Yeah. So, I think when you watch the remake, it's, you have all this context that you didn't have. I mean, there's a 50-year difference.
So you'd recommend the 70s one?
I think if you liked the one from 2020, yeah, go back and watch the original. It's the same story roughly, but I mean, I think it adds a lot of context to that original as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll have to check that one out. I'm going to tag on to that because what you're talking about reminds me a little bit of a movie I talked about in our first episode, which is one of my favorites that I think kind of represents my personality, is Swan Song. So I'm just going to say, go back to episode 1, watch that, and then check out Swan Song, because it is also about a character who survived the 80s era and is now kind of in his older years trying to reflect on that and what all that means. But it's a very funny movie, and starring Udo Kier, and it's really great. But my final pick, that is not my final pick, because as much as I want to be like, let me just talk about Swan Song more times. I'm talking about a movie that for me was actually, in retrospect, a very big deal for me personally, which might sound wild as I tell you the title. It was In and Out from 1997, directed by Frank Oz, who in my mind is one of the best comedy directors out there, and written by Paul Rudnick, who also wrote Sister Act and Addams Family Values and Jeffrey. So like, I mean, it stars Kevin Kline as a school teacher in a small town that is deeply beloved by everyone in the small town. His parents are super proud of him. His coworkers think the world of him. His students adore him. And then the Oscars happen, and one of his former students goes on stage and wins an Oscar for playing a gay character and says, and I'd like to thank Howard Brackett, who's my English teacher, and he's gay. And just nationally outs his teacher, which hilariously, this was based on the fact that when Tom Hanks won the Oscar for Philadelphia, he did that.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, he was, and it's like, I don't know what happened to those people that he outed, but he was like, he credited his performance to 2 gay people in his life and said their names. I'm assuming he ran it by them first.
I hope so.
This movie imagines that he didn't, and Howard is, 1, not out, and 2, has not had that realization himself. He, in fact, is getting ready to marry Joan Cusack's character, which I've previously talked about how I deeply love Joan Cusack and think she's amazing. But what I love about this movie, I saw it in theaters when it came out, and before I realized that I was bi, queer, I went to see it with my second boyfriend, who was lovely. But like, watching this movie, why it speaks to me so much, even more now looking back on my life, is that like, it's about someone in a small town who has to confront that he is gay with literally everyone watching, and they are all like confronting it too. And it's a parody in that the way Rudnick writes it is they put in real things that people say to you about queerness that are ridiculous and insulting, and it makes them funny because they are being put in the mouths of like well-meaning but dopey high school students. So like it has the ability to then kind of make those attacks feel softer and funnier and less intense. And it's ultimately a story about a small town realizing they don't care that how they're not bothered by Howard being gay. And there's a very my like I get teared up about it. There's a very lovely scene at the end where essentially he's being prejudiced, like there's prejudice against him. He's going to lose his teaching job because there are people that feel it's not appropriate or whatever. And his students in their graduation cap and gowns like stand up for him by basically doing the I am Spartacus moment, and in doing that parody the idea that like queerness spreads. Like, and they're just like, well, that means I'm gay. And like his parents stand up and say they're gay. And it's like this lovely story about a small town threatened to be torn apart by becoming like the focus of a national news story. And instead, they look at Howard, who does come out eventually in a very spectacular, very embarrassing way. And they look to him and they are inspired by him and they share their own things that they keep to themselves. And it's actually a very sweet story about like loving people where they're at.
Yeah.
And also just Joan Cusack is just top tier. Like everybody in this is so great. So this movie's a little bit controversial in retrospect because it stars Kevin Kline and Tom Selleck playing gay characters. And you know, at the time in the 90s, there were not a ton of actors who were talking about being gay. So that's part of it. But also, I don't personally have an issue with, you know, straight actors playing gay roles as long as they're not making a joke of that character. And what's actually really interesting about this movie is everybody in it, it's like a pretty broad comedy. Like I said, it's like a parody style thing. So everybody's very goofy. And by contrast, these characters are not standing out. They are not being played as like ridiculously flamboyant or offensively. And like, even though it plays with stereotypes, even those stereotypes are actually very loving. Like there's one scene where one of the students is like, oh, I get why this guy thought you were gay. It's because you're smart and educated and clean and a totally decent human being. So like it's playing with those concepts in a way that I think is very accessible. And, you know, as someone who is in a small town and grew up in a very religious area, watching this was just eye-opening in a way I didn't fully understand until years later. It's also just very funny. So like if you again, it's like it's just but like when we were reflecting on these lists, I was like, oh, I can see why this for people is maybe not the best example of a pride movie, but for me personally, there were so many things that reflected things I'd experienced or I had seen that like watching it again, I was laughing, but I was also like, oh, like I feel that.
Yeah. No, I mean, was it like I don't want to get too personal if you don't want to talk about it, but like it kind of like a healing movie for you just to see it and be like, okay, like the parody is like, how did that feel that it was kind of like this comedy, I think?
Like like I said, like at the time I just thought I was straight, and so I thought it was a very funny movie, but that was kind of all the deeper I was doing. But I like over the years I've revisited, but revisiting it to talk about this podcast, I realized like I had to really reflect on, because like as a film critic I have to reflect on why a movie impacts me the way it does.
Sure.
But with older movies I'm not necessarily doing that. So this is a movie I saw when it came out and I've watched a bunch since, but haven't like interrogated. And so sitting down with that, I was like, oh, it's because I love the idea of being in that situation and being like, this is, yeah, I'm queer, and like having people have a strong reaction, but like ultimately a loving acceptance. Like it was really, it is cathartic. Like I'm not gonna act like I have some dark personal narrative, but like, you know, definitely as you know, a baby bi growing up in Pennsylvania, I I couldn't imagine something like this. So to see it on the screen was actually, I think I stored that away for myself, and then when I was ready to have that conversation, I think portrayals like this did make me feel like you're gonna be okay.
No, I mean that's why I mean that's just the power of movies and why representation matters. Whether you know it or not, you could be helping somebody and not even know it at the time, and years later it could click. You know, who knows? That was the moment. You know, that's really cool. I mean, it sounds like a really sweet movie. That's a great story. Like, I need to go check it out. I love Joan Cusack too. So you've sold me on anything she's in. But no, it sounds incredible, and that's awesome. Your connection to it. I love that.
Thank you. And like, my thing is always like, you don't have to be LGBTQ to engage in Pride Month cinema. There's so much here that exists for you to just discover something you didn't know about before, to just, maybe find something in there that connects to your story. Like you were saying with Shiva Baby, obviously you've never been in that exact circumstance, but like,
Well,
we,
don't assume.
you know what? That's fair.
No,
I
I
don't know your
haven't. I
life.
haven't. I haven't been.
No, but I think that there's, that's what's so cool about this month is that like it is a way for us to celebrate our community, but also people who are not necessarily a part of the community, but are supportive of that community or curious about that community. Like there's so many films on Kanopy that allow you to have the space to explore that and to process that however makes sense to you.
Yeah, and I totally agree. As somebody who I'm not a part of that community, but these movies help me learn, uh, empathize, like just understand, and they get me out of a bubble that you can easily find yourself in with algorithms and internet, and you can easily get yourself in this really tight bubble of this is my world and that's it. And yeah, these movies have all helped me just break out of that little bubble and understand there's more to the world than just me, which I think we could all use right now.
I love that. Well, that's a wrap on this episode of the Film Library at Kanopy podcast. We hope you're leaving with a longer watch list and maybe a little more insight into the power of LGBTQ plus stories on screen.
We'll include all of our picks in the show notes and over on Kanopy's Letterboxd HQ account. And if you haven't yet, head on over to Kanopy.com to explore the full Pride collection and stream incredible films for free with your library card or university login.
Subscribe to the Film Library to keep up on the latest episodes. And if you like the show, leave us a review or share it with your film friends. And stay tuned. We'll be back with new episodes twice a month, highlighting more titles from Kanopy's catalog. Head to Kanopy.com to start streaming today.
You can keep up with us and Kanopy over on social media. I'm Jeff Rauseo. You can find me on pretty much every social media platform and on Letterboxd. Just search my name, JEFFRAUSEO.
And I'm the Kristy Puchko on Instagram. I'm also on Blue Sky and Letterboxd. You can just search for my name, Kristy Puchko, KRISTYPUCHKO.
So until next time, keep watching boldly and keep talking movies with pride.